Hi, my name's Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. Today's case that I'm going to cover is a very tragic case, and it's a case of domestic abuse that led to a young mum being killed by her abuser. It's also an interesting case because Mitchel Quy, who was Lynsey's husband, invited the media into his home when she'd gone missing, and he appeared on television protesting his innocence. Many thanks to the person who suggested this for analysis today. I have searched so much and can't find your name on any of the things that I've looked through, so many apologies, but thanks for suggesting the case. Lyndsey and Mitchel had a very turbulent relationship. There were frequent episodes of aggression and violence. They'd split up several times during their time, but Mitchel always managed to convince Lynsey to take him back. The last sighting of Lynsey was on December the 15th, 1998. Mitchel made a television appeal for her to return home. He claimed that she had simply walked out on him and the children. Quy said, "She left without saying goodbye. I thought she would come back for the kids, but she obviously doesn't care about us anymore." In the 18 months that Lynsey was missing and they didn't know that she'd died, Mitchel kept up this public facade of being a jilted husband who'd been left to look after 2 young children on his own, insinuating that his wife had run off with another man. The reality was that Mitchel Quy strangled his wife, then cut her body up with the help of his brother, and then disposed of her body. When he was caught and convicted, Mitchel Quy was sentenced to life imprisonment. His brother Elliot was sentenced to 7 years for his part in it. As you know, I normally like to start at the beginning. And what I mean by that is I usually take a look at the offender's upbringing. However, with this case, there's very little information available about his childhood and his upbringing. All that we do know from the various reports is that his mother was dead, he had a brother who'd help him cut up Lynsey's body, and he had a father who's only ever spoken publicly to say that Elliot, Mitchel's brother, had been released from prison and had received death threats but was just trying to stay out of the public eye. He said that he thought that he was cajoled into doing what he did by his brother. Now that in itself indicates to me that Mitchel had a history of aggression and manipulation. We also know that none of Mitchel Quy family was present when he married Lynsey. Again, this indicates that there isn't that close family bond and connection, and that he's likely to have had, or was having at the time, dysfunctional relationships with his father and his brother. So let's look then at Mitchel and Lynsey's relationship from the very beginning. Lynsey had her first serious relationship when she was 17 years old. She then became pregnant, however, that relationship ended when she was just 5 months pregnant. She then met Mitchel Quy, who was 3 years older than her. As soon as the pair met, they fell in love, and the relationship moved really fast. Mitchel would dote on her and would bring her little gifts like flowers or cards or other little presents. And Lynsey was thrilled and perhaps even saw Mitchel as a source of stability and comfort in her life. And most importantly, he swept her off her feet. They married within 5 weeks of first meeting. Whenever there is excessive amounts of attention and admiration from a person when they first meet a potential mate, it sets off alarm bells in my mind. This type of tactic is called love bombing, and it's typically used by narcissists to draw a person in to get them hooked, so to speak. I think I better just rephrase that for any viewers who are on the autistic spectrum, sorry. I'm always concerned when a person shows excessive attention and admiration very early on in the relationship. This is called love bombing, and it's done to make the other person feel loved, wanted and craving more. Lynsey's family, quite rightly, weren't happy about the relationship. The relationship had moved very fast, and her parents were concerned that she was marrying somebody that she didn't know all that well. It's likely that the fast pace of the relationship was entirely deliberate on Mitchel's behalf. He knew that Lynsey had no time to get to know what he was really like. But from Lynsey's point of view, She was so in love with this person that she thought he was, or the person she wanted him to be, that it simply felt natural and right to marry him. Narcissists can be very magnetic and very charming. They are really good at creating a fantastical, flattering self-image that draws people in. People are attracted to that apparent confidence and their lofty dreams. And when the person's own self-esteem is shaky, the more seductive the allure becomes. It's easy to get caught up in their web, thinking that they'll fulfill our longing to feel more important and feel more alive. But it is just that, a fantasy, and it was quite a costly one at that for Lynsey. As I mentioned earlier, Mitchel's family didn't attend their wedding. I'm sure that at the time you would have placed the blame for them not attending on them. It's clear to me quite early on that he is a narcissist. Narcissists always seek to blame other people and to put other people down. The arguments between Mitchel and Lynsey started on the evening of their wedding day. They moved in together, but they continued to argue. Lynsey asked him to move out eventually, and she told her sister that he had violent outbursts. These violent outbursts from Mitchel are most likely to have occurred because he didn't get what he wanted, or he blamed her for something that wasn't her fault. That aggression serves to demonstrate a narcissist's power and control over their victim. However, Lynsey soon realised that she'd become pregnant with his child just about 1 year after giving birth to her first child. So therefore, Lynsey made the decision to terminate the pregnancy. And she did that because of the instability and the frequent violent outbursts at home. But when Mitchel found out that she'd terminated that pregnancy, he flew into another rage. He moved out at that point. But whilst they were married, Mitchel regularly cheated on Lynsey. And that is fairly typical of a narcissist. They don't value the person that they're in a relationship with. They're always looking for the next thing to excite them or pleasure them. But despite that, Lynsey allowed him to move back in 5 months later. She also then told him that she wanted to have a baby with him, and she very quickly became pregnant. It would be easy to criticise her for taking him back after that. However, the way that narcissists operate is to strip away any thoughts of capability or power or sense of control. They make their victim think that they need them or that their life would be better with them in it. And that happens really slowly and gradually, and so the person might not even recognise what the narcissist is doing to them. Lynsey would have had the mindset at the time of wanting to please him, wanting to make him happy. She would also had that element of fear because of the aggression, and it would have been both fear of him and his violent outbursts, as well as the fear of thinking that she wasn't capable enough to bring up a child on her own. Narcissists have a constant need to be revered with praise and admiration. They need that admiration in abundance, and that protects their fragile psyche that they're hiding. They surround themselves with people who are more than willing to constantly feed that need. These relationships are always very one-sided. It's all about what the admirer can do for the narcissist and never the other way around. Kai knew that Lynsey would continue to feed him with the admiration that he wanted. While she was pregnant, Mitchel had a very violent outburst at home when she was out one day. He broke glass, he unhinged doors, he punched walls, and that unfortunately led to the pair being thrown out of their house. Their son was born about 6 months later. Mitchel moved out again, and Women's Aid helped Lynsey to find a new house, and Mitchel wasn't given the address. Lynsey was so fearful of him that at that point she carried around a portable panic button. However, Mitchel did persuade her to allow him to see his son for his first birthday. And from there, he managed to persuade her to allow him back into her home. Perhaps understandably, she didn't tell their family when they'd got back together. And when they did eventually find out that they'd got back together, they distanced themselves from the pair. They must have felt devastated and helpless. They could see how violent and manipulative Mitchel Quy was being. The last sighting of Lynsey was on December the 15th, 1998. After that, no one saw her or heard from her again. Her mum did try and get in touch with her near Christmas time, but she was told by Mitchel that she was going out. She wasn't reported missing until the 5th of February by a social worker. She'd actually given a note to her sister in the October before saying, "Please help me." But the sister had given that to the mother. I can only imagine the struggle that they must have had. They'd helped Lynsey escape him a few times, and she went back to him again and again. Once she was reported missing, we then start to see the extent of Mitchel's depraved nature. He made television appeals for her to return home. He claimed that she'd walked out on him and the children. In effect, he's really blaming her for going missing. And that type of finger pointing is typical of narcissists. However, Mitchel appeared on TV, and when he did, he didn't come across as somebody that you felt any empathy for. He comes across as insincere, and his appeals for Lynsey to come home, throughout all of that, he wore a constant smirk on his face, as though he was sharing some sort of a private joke with himself. And because of that, he was labelled the smiling killer. Mitchel really enjoyed this spotlight and attention being on him. He kept every single newspaper article. He appeared on any TV shows or radio shows that invited him. He claimed that Lynsey had just up and left one day and simply never came back. At a police press conference, Kai said, "She left without saying goodbye. I thought she would have come back for the kids, but obviously she doesn't care about us anymore." He did come under a lot of suspicion at the time, and he was constantly denying any involvement in her disappearance. When an interviewer asked him on film had he killed Lynsey, instead of replying just a flat no, he said, "I'm not going to answer that question because I don't need to. You make your own mind up because eventually everyone will find out." He even toyed with the detectives that were searching for his missing wife at the time. He sent the lead detective a Christmas card and a box of hair dye, saying it was to cover up his grey hairs and give him extra confidence. When narcissists meet people who are popular or confident, they feel very threatened, especially if that person has something that the narcissist lacks. And the way that they deal with this is they put that person down. They treat them with contempt. And that's exactly what Mitchel was doing with the detective. He believes that he's more intelligent and he's better than everybody else. He doesn't show any concern at all for his missing wife, and he made it all about him. Of course, this is very selfish, but it also reflects another aspect of narcissism, and that's the selfish need to make everything about them, and his needs being the only important thing that anybody should be concerned with. He truly believes that he should get whatever he wanted. Narcissists in general will expect the people around them to automatically comply with every order, every wish and whim. He said on film that he'd had sex in the year since his wife had gone missing. He justified this by saying, "When it's offered to you on a plate, you take it, don't you?" But other men wouldn't have even considered this while their wife was missing. He completely lacks any empathy for Lynsey, and I can only assume lacks empathy for anybody else around him. He continued to claim benefits on Lynsey's behalf, and because of that, he was arrested. And he was arrested on suspicion of the murder, incitement to cause grievous bodily harm, and fraud. He was sentenced to community service for cashing the benefit checks, but the other charges had to be dropped because of the lack of evidence. The documentary that I seen of him shows footage of him working in a charity shop where he tells the cameras, "Me having to do this and leaving me with the kids, I wouldn't pee on her if she was on fire." You can watch all of the documentaries and the interviews because I'll put them in the video description box for you. In the 18 months that Lynsey was missing, Mitchel kept up this public facade of being a jilted husband who'd been abandoned to look after 2 young children. Nobody who knew Lynsey, though, believed this. She would never have chose to leave her children. She was a devoted mum. Mitchel claimed several times throughout that time that he'd seen Lynsey walking around town or driving a Mercedes, but he was the only person who claimed to see her. Mitchel thought that he had been successful in deceiving the police, the public, Lynsey's family. For almost a year and a half he got away with it, and there was no sign of Lynsey anywhere. On the 7th of June 2000, the police came to the conclusion that Lynsey had died on or shortly after the 15th of December 1998. They went to Mitchel's home and brought him in for questioning. Mitchel was interviewed for 2 days and he refused to give the police officers any information at all. But then they charged him with the murder, and an hour later he confessed. He even took the police to the area that he dumped their body in. Before taking them there, he asked, would there be press there? So again, that's another reflection of narcissism. Narcissists have this constant need to be revered with praise and admiration. They want to be the centre of attention. So under the gaze of the media that day, he's very smiley and he's very chatty with the police officers. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't show any remorse whatsoever. On his taped confession, he said that he and Lynsey had been arguing and that he'd held her down with his hands around her throat for about 20 minutes. He said, the next day I went to see my brother Elliot. I didn't know what to do. We decided to dispose of the body, to cut her up into pieces and dispose of her body that way. It was me that mutilated my wife's body. My brother didn't do anything like that. He simply held the bags open. They had removed her head and hands, and they put that out with a general waste, and those parts of her body, unfortunately, were never recovered. So he led the police to the location that he'd put her torso in, and he callously refers to it as a carcass. He simply doesn't have the ability to empathise at all. He's very sadistic. She was only ever an object to him. She was somebody who would lavish love and attention on him. Mitchel Quy was sentenced to life imprisonment, and his brother was sentenced to 7 years for his part. Even in prison though, there have been several reports of verbal aggression and bullying from Mitchel. He became eligible to apply for parole, but he was refused for this because of risk factors associated with his vengeful thinking, controlling and manipulative behaviour, lack of victim awareness, and drug and alcohol use. So unfortunately, this case demonstrates the ways in which domestic abuse can escalate to murder. There were so many people and agencies that tried to help Lynsey. However, Lynsey made the fatal mistake of thinking that things would get better. If you do want to learn more about offender profiling and criminal psychology in general, head over to my website. There are various online courses, games and blogs. My Patreon account is now up and running, so please consider supporting me so that I can bring you more of the content that you love. I hope that you found today's analysis interesting. More importantly, I hope you've learned something new from it. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.